We're seeing a watershed moment for global trade. U.S. President Donald Trump has imposed sweeping tariffs on imports to the United States that seem likely to fundamentally reshape not just the American economy, but the world's. Among them, 25% tariffs on cars and certain car parts from abroad, which Trump says are meant to boost domestic manufacturing. Yet what he's hailed as Liberation Day is something that many economists see as likely to drive inflation and slow growth. So who has the most to lose here? This week on To The Point, we're diving into Trump's tariffs, his latest salvo in a global trade war. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of To The Point. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin and thrilled to introduce our fabulous panel for you this week. We have Erik Kirschbaum, an American journalist and author. Clifford Coonan from DW Business, who specializes in China. Claudia Schmucker, the German Council on Foreign Relations, where she leads the Center for Geopolitics, Geoeconomics, and Technology. And joining us remotely today, we have Beatrix Keim, Director of the Center Automotive Research. Warm welcome to you all. So glad you could join us. Claudia, let's set one thing straight here. One of the American voters' biggest concerns going into these elections that saw Trump get a second term in office was the economy, the cost of living. And here we have Trump saying that if American consumers are encouraged to buy more American products, that's going to be good for the domestic economy. Do you see tariffs as a useful tool for achieving this?
No, I don't see tariffs as a useful tool at all. You need to know that we do not produce American products. We have global value chains. We need imports to produce competitive and good products. So if you raise the cost with a tax, which counts you raise the cost through tariffs, which counts as a tax, then the end product will be much more expensive. So the inflation problems that the Americans had will rise again.
Mm-hmm. So who is going to be bearing the brunt of these rising costs then, Clifford?
Well, at the moment, it looks like we're going to see a lot of pressure on countries like China, which has got almost 70% tariffs at this point, which is massive. It's also going to hit middle-income countries, and it's particularly going to hit developing countries because goods will become more expensive. And also the fact is that nobody will be investing in anything. And it's going to hit the US consumer as well through rising costs.
Yeah, I think that's really important to bring in as well. Erik, Trump's justifications often do seem to be bound up in foreign policy goals, right? We've got issues ranging from border control, preventing fentanyl smuggling, trade deficits, just to name a few things that Trump has referenced. Do you think we're seeing some kind of new foreign policy here in the Trump administration by using these economic tools?
He wanted to do more of this in his first term, but he had advisors who kind of reined him in. This time, those advisors to rein him in are gone. But if you look at Trump's interviews going back to the 80s, he's had a problem with the EU, Germany, especially Japan, with huge trade surpluses with the US, and yet the United States has been defending these countries with billions and billions of dollars. So this has been on Trump's mind for a long time. He talks about it a lot, and he promised his voters he would do this, and he's doing it. It could be some ugly shakeout, some ugly fallout. It's a dark day for free trade, but there's hope there, too. This is only the beginning of the negotiations. At the end of the day, maybe there'll be some kind of deal in between. He did this with Mexico and Canada, as we know. So the game's not over yet, and we shouldn't bash Trump yet. He's standing up for the American workers who love him. He won election quite handily. So this is what his voters want, and he's giving it to them.
Beatrix, these unknowns that Erik has just referenced are really important too, right? We've talked about those threatened tariffs on U.S. partners like Canada and Mexico that were then postponed. What does that uncertainty mean for businesses that are operating in this environment where they don't know whether something said today is going to be true tomorrow?
This is exactly the point. If you need to move your production into the US, you don't know if everything is going to be stable. What else is coming into his or the whole administration's mind? And how long does it really last? Is it going to be then different after 4 years? So all these points are very uncertain. And especially if you move the production into the US, are the products really then cheaper than, as he says? Are the good prices to be going down? Because we doubt that. Usually then in the US, the overall cost of salary, the cost of work is quite high. So that means as well that even if you now produce the products in the US which have been imported, they have been imported because they were cheaper, mostly cheaper to be produced somewhere else. So once again, prices are rising, inflation will rise. So in the final end, this is not really pro the workers.
So let's pull back for a moment and take a look at exactly what's going on here. One of the impacts of globalization has been American manufacturing jobs going overseas in the last 30 years or so. And Trump says that he wants to re-industrialize the United States, and tariffs do seem to be his tool of choice there.
It's about making America great again, making it strong and prosperous again. Thank you very much.
It is pure protectionism, with every new signature tariffs on imports from foreign competitors. On the other hand, Trump says,
Do your work right here. If you have your company here, if you build your product, make your car, or whatever it is you're making, no tariffs. Everybody.
Trump wants to bring industry back to America and create many new jobs. He sees this as a unique opportunity to restructure the U.S. economy according to his vision.
Higher prices, and then just a
No, I don't think so. I think you're going to have a country that's going to boom.
At the same time, he wants to use tariff revenues to plug holes in the national budget. After all, he promised tax cuts during his election campaign. Tariffs also seem to be about power politics for Trump. He uses them to put pressure on other countries. Allegedly lax border controls on migration and drug smuggling? Tariffs. Trump's attack on free global trade. Will his tariff plan work?
Let's pass that question directly on to Claudia. Claudia, will this tariff plan work?
No, it will not. The first thing I want to say is that the voters did not bargain for that. They had a feeling that the economy is not working, that inflation is high. They believed that Trump would rescue them out of that situation. What they are getting is exactly the opposite. As was mentioned, high protectionism, no competitiveness, high inflationary pressures, high prices. This will really be to the detriment of the American voter who voted for him. The second part I would like to say is nothing in here is reciprocal. Nothing in here is fair. When you look at the EU, we almost have a balanced current account balance. So if you add services to the goods, it's almost balanced. So where do the 20% come from? There's no basis for these kind of tariffs, which means how can we negotiate something? What does he want us to offer if there's no real basis for the tariffs that we have? He will not get manufacturing back. There were many factors why manufacturing left the United States. It is the China factor, it's the digitization, automation. Tariffs is not the answer to all of this. It's his instrument of choice, but this will not remedy anything that he wants.
And we will take a closer look at how we expect Europe to respond to these. But Erik, first, I'm curious, Trump's team, at least, have said that they do expect there might be some bumps in the road here as they implement this, but they see this maybe as a longer-term plan that could do some good for the American economy. Do you know if there is a timeline in mind or any world in which it does achieve those results that they're hoping to get, say, even if it's years or a decade down the road?
For Trump and his voters, the only thing that matters is that he's fighting for them. They love it that he's fighting for them, even if he doesn't succeed. And whether or not it's a total failure or not, the tariffs, we'll have to wait and see. I think at the end of the day, it'll be a lot lower than he wants. But he's fighting for them. And we're seeing already a drift of some car makers back to the United States. Mercedes, BMW have big plants in the U.S. He believes this is one way to strengthen the country. He talked about a golden era of the United States. When Trump was a young man in the 50s and 60s, about 100% of the cars on the roads were made in America. And it was companies like Volkswagen with very clever advertising that came in the 60s and 70s. And all of a sudden, the foreign car share is much, much larger. And the United States is the most important market for car makers around the world. They all need to be there, as we know. So Trump is trying to shake things up. That's his modus operandi. He likes to shake things up. And he's promised to use the tariffs, billions and billions, to lower income tax. And that's something the Americans obviously love as well.
Yeah, Beatrix, tell us more about this. What about the world economy? Do you think the rest of the world are inevitably going to be the losers here?
In Finland, everybody is kind of, and especially, of course, the consumers. If it is the American consumer or somewhere else, wherever you need to pay more tariff or there is set up more tariffs, that means, as Claudia already said, prices are rising. And in Finland, it's as well the other side of the balance. Even if production plants, let's stay with the automotive industry, are increased in capacity in the US, or they are moved from Germany, for example, into the US. Then on the other side, these car makers need to balance the interest in the original countries or in the countries where they take off that production capacity, because then, of course, there are job cuts then pending on. So overall, it is then as well, not only from the manufacturers of cars or from goods, it's as well the whole production, the supply chain, which is so much entangled worldwide. To tear that apart, to disentangle that, takes a lot of time and a lot of money.
Yeah, and cars are a really good example of that. Let's see if we can take a closer look at the effects on one industry to show just how complex this issue is. And I'm talking specifically about German car makers, who are in particular expected to be really hard hit by this. As Beatrix has said, it's not that simple. We've got intertwined supply chains and tariffs likely to have huge consequences for American industry as well.
No country buys as many cars from Germany as the U.S. does. 13% of German car exports, around 450,000 units, went there last year. It is Germany's most important market, partly because demand from China has fallen. 25% tariffs, a severe blow to the struggling German auto industry. At the same time, German manufacturers produce around 900,000 cars in the U.S. Tens of thousands of these are exported, including to Europe. The industry's international supply chains are closely intertwined. VW builds most of its vehicles for the U.S. market in neighboring Mexico. But no one delivers as many cars from Mexico to America as General Motors and Ford. And even when a car is manufactured in the U.S., up to half of it consists of imported parts, which will also incur higher tariffs and thus higher prices. Are Trump's tariffs a boomerang also for the U.S. economy?
Beatrix, your thoughts here. Car parts, they sometimes cross multiple borders before actually being assembled into a car. What additional costs could automakers be facing, and especially U.S. car makers?
Well, that is, to be honest, a very tough question. Let me respond very bluntly. It's billions of dollars, because we are not only talking about a little screw or a little simmering to come in. It is about engines, about bumpers. It is about tires as well that come in. So if all of those will then, as of May, be hit with the 25% of tariffs. And yes, of course, at current point of time, it's not really clear if the Canadian and Mexican imports are protected or not. It is a very high number. And once again, this is then in the final end rising prices. It will indicate very quickly on the consumer side as well. And if somebody's, it's only $3,000 overall, a car gets more expensive. I doubt that. I think it is even more. And once again, do the suppliers, do the OEMs really bow to this and move all back into the US? Because then even they might not have in the original plants the sufficient economies of scale, which can provide lower prices. So if you now need to differentiate those volumes as well into the US, the economies of scale to a certain ratio are gone. And once again, higher prices. The investment into new plants, into the enhancement of plants, increasement of plants, all of this costs money, which probably in the final end will not come back with perhaps a higher sales in the US.
So Clifford, broadening this out, is Trump here risking a full-blown trade war? And in concrete terms, what does that actually look like for people?
Well, I think the car industry is a great example of. I think he is certainly he's firing an opening salvo, but I think we also need to take a minute to see how this unfolds. But the risk would be higher prices. So some estimates are up to $5,000 extra on the cost of a car for the U.S. consumer, which obviously wouldn't go down well in middle America. But I think a very important point needs to be made as well is that the global trade system was broken. In many ways, this is like Brexit. It's almost like an incredible overreaction to what was actually problematic in terms of, there is a problem there. China has been flooding the global market with heavily subsidized goods. It's been keeping its currency artificially low. And European car makers are struggling to compete with China. And the US car makers are also having to deal with all these competitive pressures from all these cheap goods coming from China. So everyone was kind of agreed that something needed to be done to address these issues. But this is kind of, a gun to a knife fight reaction in a way.
Do you agree with that, Beatrix? I guess to put it more specifically, are we really seeing under this Trump administration a beginning to the end of globalization?
Well, my first point I also want to add on the car part was that we have highly integrated car global value chains in Canada, Mexico, and US. And this USMCA agreement was negotiated by Trump himself, and he said that's a good agreement now. And if you have a car, usually it says that the car parts need to cross about 8 times the border.
Oh, wow.
Which means 25%, 8 times to have a final car assembled. So this is the problem that we have. So the end of the global order. And we had a lot of problems. Yes, China is still a problem. Overcapacity is still a problem. But these were problems we could deal with or needed to have dealt with. We do not need these kind of tariffs. These are no answers to the problems that we have. So now we look at the global trading system. The US has been outside of the WTO de facto for ages, already under Biden. So we do not have a dispute settlement system anymore. We have no trade liberalization going on. But US has a large market and as such is only 10% of global trade. If the US is out, fine. EU is negotiating free trade agreements with Mercosur, with Indonesia, with Asian countries. Since Trump is in office, all these countries are lining up to work with the EU. We have rules-based trade with these countries, and rules-based trade is beneficial for every single country. So we will be the one who profit from it. And if we adhere to WTO rules, I think we can rescue the system. And the one country that will lose out is the United States.
Yeah, Erik, is that the public sentiment in the United States? Because as Claudia has just explained, there was a system in place that was largely constructed by the United States in the post-World War era. And now when you look at hardworking Americans feeling their pocketbooks being pinched, how do you think they're approaching what Trump has done with these tariffs and what he's promising them?
Like many things in the United States, it's very polarized, very divided. Half the people trust him and believe him, and the other half think he's out of his mind. So it's another one of those partisan battles in America playing out. Interestingly, there are some Republican senators who are already very worried about this, and they may try to vote against it. So it's not the end of the opera yet. I mean, this will be watered down a bit. And Republicans especially are the free traders all along. So it's hard for me to see the Republican Party caving in like it has under Trump and going for this. On the other hand, I lived in the Midwest in Wisconsin. I went to college there, and there's a lot of towns and cities that are really, really hurting. J.D. Vance is from a really poor part of Ohio. So you can understand the hope that these people have of somehow industry can come back. Maybe it never will. Maybe you're right. Maybe there's no chance in hell of it happening. But they believe Trump is fighting for them, and there may be some jobs that come back, some jobs that make it safe. Look at the sneakers, right? Americans love sneakers. 1/3 of the sneakers that Americans buy are made in Vietnam, Nike and all this. And Vietnam was hit very hard by Trump's list, 45% of it. So maybe some of those shoe jobs will come back to the United States. Maybe Nike will open some production capacity in the United States. It's not You don't have to be a dreamer to think that could happen. So Trump is fighting for the little guy, the people who are struggling in the Midwest, and I think the people are going to like him until inflation makes life unbearably high. And if they don't get the tax break like they're hoping for, it could be a problem for Trump, and pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting how kind of the classic positions of the Democrats and Republicans are not what you might expect to see in this case, right? And you even had the trade unions that represent car makers really in favor of these tariffs that Trump has put into place.
That's all part of the big switch. There are former Democratic voting areas like Pennsylvania used to be all Democrat union workers. Now they all vote for Republican and Trump. It's been a total flip of the picture. And you're absolutely right. What used to be Democrat is now Republican, and it's the Democrats who are the big free trade campaigners in the United States.
Yeah, or something new altogether, even.
Right.
Beatrix, many are wondering how Europe is going to respond to this. The EU chief, Ursula von der Leyen, has said the consequences will be dire for millions of people around the world. Is it already clear what kind of European response there will be?
Not entirely clear, but there are plans in the pocket already prepared, and I think they want to respond in a way, in a, let's say, realistic way, in a rational way, not to steer up and to steam up the atmosphere even more. I think they want to put up tariffs, perhaps on the known one like motorcycles, perhaps on jeans, perhaps on whiskey, but as well on some grocery goods. So they try to make it in a certain balance, not to hit too hard, but to show a stand. And I think this is the most important point. On one hand side, Mr. Trump is a deal maker. He's a pure businessman. He comes from the pure business making side. So he wants to make a deal. He wants as well to deal with strong people. So you cannot totally bow to him. Cannot be too soft, but you need to show a stand. But you need, I think, as well to find proper arguments for how to deal this out, that both sides have a good side. First point, for example, could be to lower the tariffs on American cars, on American imports. That would be something. But coming a little bit back to the point which was made earlier, that of course, if you look into Germany and the workers, how they react to the current situation, it's pretty similar. Before they were all voting for the Social Democrat Party. Now they're going more to the very right-wing AfD because they don't see themselves represented in the right way. Is that right? From my perspective, not, because it's a totally wrong party program, which is coming up, very racist, very right side, and we had that 90 years ago. We don't need that again. And I just fear that something similar is happening in the US, only because of people are only looking into their own advantage.
Yeah, so Clifford, you've got these monumental changes in politics in Germany and in Western democracies around the world. I just want to come back to this question of whether we're seeing the U.S. fundamentally change the way in which global trade is organized in response to these. I've asked it before, but I will just ask it again. Is it the end of globalization here?
I think it is. I think globalization has been struggling for a while now. And I think China is partially to blame for this because they've undermined a lot of trade alliances by playing hard and fast with the rules. And they will, on the one hand, say what an important organization the WTO is, but on the other hand, they consistently breach all these regulations with subsidies and all these other... The fact is that finding level playing fields has become incredibly difficult, and you need level playing fields for trade. And how do you do that nowadays? So I think terrible in many ways as these, and economically senseless in many ways that these new tariffs are, they do reflect a changing attitude that isn't just in the US, it's actually around the world as to how globalization is supposed to work, because it's creating too many imbalances. It's creating massive wealth gaps. There's all kinds of problems associated with globalization that are really coming to the fore. And I think this opening salvo from Trump is really the start of a global trade war that will ultimately finish globalization.
I hate to disagree with you, Clifford, but I'm going to disagree with you. I think the end of globalization is way over the top. Globalization trade is growing and growing and growing. And sure, this is a setback, this is a bump in the road, and it could lead to worse things, as we saw in the 30s, but hopefully cooler heads will prevail. The EU is making a good response, but I think globalization is inexorable, inevitable. There's no going back now. It's made the whole world more prosperous.
Yeah, Claudia, what do you think? Is Europe going to be able to become less dependent on trade with the United States by striking other agreements? You've mentioned Mercosur as being an important element. Is it enough to replace what they've relied on to date?
Well, we have the US as a large market. It's very hard to replace the United States, and we do not want to not trade with the United States. I mean, we have the United States as a trading investment partner. It's not that we want to end this. We just feel that it's very one-sided what we see right now, and that they do not support the transatlantic relationship the way we have. What we try is to diversify, still work with the Americans if possible. I'm not sure that's going to happen right now because they do not negotiate in good faith. This is why I do not believe in the transactional part. I do not think they are willing to give us anything, but still try to keep the negotiations as far going as possible, but then diversify.
Yeah. Clifford, is the US now just transforming into what has been a partner but turning into an enemy in all possible areas, like from security to the economy? Is that what we're seeing?
Well, I think, first of all, just to go back to globalization briefly,
Please.
I don't think that the idea of global trade is dead. I mean, you're not going to be able to, you can't make champagne in the Midwest.
Not yet.
But not yet. But in its classic sense, I think it is that that we're not going to see it. We're not going to see it anymore. So the US is certainly transforming, and we're just going to have to wait and see what it becomes.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for the very lively panel and your insights today. It's been fantastic speaking with you all. We have Erik Kirschbaum, Clifford Coonan, Claudia Schmucker, and Beatrix Keim with us in the studio. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you are watching on YouTube, you can leave us a comment to let us know what you thought, and I hope to see you next time.